A man with $1 billion empire, a titan of industry, believed his wealth was a golden key that could unlock any door and solve any problem. When he carried his beautiful, much younger lover into the emergency room, her life fading in his arms, he was ready to write any check by the entire hospital if he had to. He demanded the best because he could afford it. But in the cold, sterile hallway, under the hum of fluorescent lights, he would learn a devastating lesson. The power he wielded was a child's toy, compared to a quiet, invisible force he never knew existed. His money meant nothing here, and the one person he had dismissed for years was about to shatter his entire world. The tires of Robert Henderson's Aston Martin. DB11 screeched as he swerved into the ambulance bay of St. Jude's General Hospital, ignoring the blaring horn of an approaching ambulance and the frantic waving of a security guard. He didn't care. The rules, the little formalities that governed other people's lives, were merely suggestions to him. He slammed the car into park and wrenched open the passenger door. Cradled in the plush leather seat was Sophie Miller, her usually vibrant face the color of bleached linen. Her breaths were shallow, fluttery things, and her eyelids, heavy and bruised-looking, struggled to stay open. A single terrifying word had escaped her lips 10 minutes ago, a word that had turned Robert's world of cool, calculated control into a vortex of raw panic. Heart. "Stay with me, baby," he grunted, scooping her into his arms. She felt impossibly light, as fragile as a bird. Her designer dress, a wisp of silk he'd bought her in Milan, was now just a useless trapping. The scent of her expensive perfume was mixed with the metallic tang of fear. He kicked the car door shut and stormed through the automatic glass doors of the emergency entrance. His custom-tailored suit, feeling like a suit of armor against the chaos within. "I need a doctor." Now he boomed, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. Heads turned. Nurses rushing with clipboards paused mid-stride. A tired-looking triage nurse behind a plexiglass barrier looked up, her expression a mixture of annoyance and weariness. "Sir, you need to," she began, but Robert cut her off. "Don't you sir me. Get me the best doctor in this hospital, the head of cardiology. I want him here in 5 minutes, or I'll buy this entire building, and your first act as my employee will be to fire yourself." The threat hung in the air, heavy and crude. It was his way. For 30 years, Robert Henderson had built a real estate empire across the West Coast by bulldozing anything and anyone in his path. Problems were solved with money. People were moved with money, and loyalty was bought with money. It was the only language he truly trusted. A team of orderlies and a doctor in blue scrubs materialized, drawn by the commotion. They expertly transferred Sophie from his arms to a gurney. As they began wheeling her away, her hand feebly reached for his. "Rob," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm right here, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice softer now, a protective growl. He jogged alongside the gurney, his hand gripping hers. "I've got all this. I'll pay for anything, fly in anyone. You're going to be fine." He was speaking to her, but he was also reassuring himself, reinforcing his own worldview. "I've got this." They disappeared through a set of swinging doors marked resuscitation, and a nurse with a kind but firm face stopped him. "Sir, you need to wait out here. We need to assess her. Please go to the admissions desk and fill out her paperwork." For a moment, Robert looked as if he might shove the nurse aside, but the sight of Sophie's pale face disappearing from view had shaken him. He felt a profound loss of control, a feeling so foreign it made him nauseous. He nodded curtly, releasing his grip on the gurney, and watched the doors swing shut. He stood alone in the hallway, the adrenaline starting to recede, leaving behind a cold dread. He was Robert Henderson. Men with 10 times his intellect and a fraction of his wealth withered under his gaze. He could make a single phone call and crumble a competitor's stock price. Yet here in this antiseptic-smelling corridor, he was just a man. A terrified man. He stalked over to the admissions desk, pulling out his wallet. The wallet itself was a statement custom-made from alligator leather, holding a black Centurion card. He tossed the card onto the counter. "Robert Henderson. The patient is Sophie Miller. Don't worry about insurance. I'm covering everything. Just get her file started." The clerk, a young man named Kevin, with tired eyes, picked up the card as if it were a holy relic. "Yes, Mr. Henderson." "Of course, sir." "Her date of birth." Robert froze. He had no idea. He knew the vintage of her favorite champagne, the exact shade of blue that made her eyes pop, the precise cut of diamond that made her gasp. "But her birthday," he stammered. 26, I think. Just find it. She must have been here before. A guess, a wild, embarrassing guess. He felt a flash of shame quickly replaced by anger. Why should he know such trivial details? He provided the lifestyle, the security. That was his role. He spent the next hour pacing the waiting room. It was a sterile, impersonal space designed to be ignored. The chairs were uncomfortable vinyl, the television was muted and showing a soap opera, and the air was thick with the quiet desperation of other people's tragedies. He ignored them all, lost in his own world of frantic phone calls. He called his executive assistant, telling him to cancel his meetings for the rest of the week. He called a contact at a rival hospital, asking who the top cardiac surgeon in the state was. He was mobilizing his army, bringing his power to bear on this invisible enemy, attacking Sophie's heart. As he was barking orders into his phone, a figure appeared at the entrance to the waiting room. A woman. She moved with a quiet grace that seemed to absorb the frantic energy of the space around her. She was elegant, not in the flashy, curated way of Sophie, but in a deep, intrinsic manner. She wore a simple cream-colored cashmere coat over charcoal grey trousers. Her silver-blonde hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her face, though lined with the quiet etchings of her 53 years, was serene. It was his wife, Jessica Henderson. Robert's blood ran cold. He ended his call abruptly. "What are you doing here?" He snapped his voice, a low, harsh whisper. Jessica's calm blue eyes met his. There was no anger in them, no accusation. There was something far more unnerving, a profound, unshakable stillness. "My assistant Brenda monitors the activity on your accounts, Robert. A charge for several $1,000s at the St. Jude's General Admissions Desk was flagged. I thought I should come." Her voice was as calm and even as her expression. "Is it Sophie?" He flinched at her saying the name. In the unspoken contract of their hollowed-out marriage, the mistresses were never named. They were abstract concepts. Your friend, your business trip. Naming her felt like a violation. Her heart, he said the words, tasting like ash. Something's wrong with her heart. Jessica simply nodded, as if processing a piece of mundane information. She walked past him and took a seat in one of the uncomfortable chairs, placing her leather handbag neatly on her lap. She didn't look at him. She just sat there, a portrait of patience waiting. Her presence was an indictment. He wanted to scream at her, to tell her to leave, that this was his crisis, his and Sophie's. But he couldn't, because in the back of his mind, a cold, practical thought emerged. If the worst happened, Jessica was the one who knew how to handle things. She handled everything. The charities, the family trusts, the social obligations. She was the manager of the life he was too busy to live. Her being here, as much as he hated it, felt necessary. And that infuriated him more than anything. The silence that settled between Robert and Jessica was not empty. It was a chasm filled with 28 years of unspoken resentments, quiet disappointments, and the ghosts of 1,000 arguments they never had. Robert continued to pace the sound of his expensive leather shoes, echoing the frantic rhythm of his own heart. Jessica remained perfectly still. Her hands folded over her purse, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the scuffed linoleum floor. To an outsider, they might have looked like a concerned couple waiting for news about their daughter. But the space between them vibrated with a cold, hard tension. Robert felt her placid presence as a judgment. Every silent second that ticked by was a condemnation of the life he'd chosen, of the girl struggling for her life just a few dozen feet away. His mind flashed back to the day he met Sophie. It was at a gallery opening his company had sponsored. He'd been bored, trapped in a conversation with a city councilman when he saw her. She was a whirlwind of life, laughing too loudly, gesturing wildly, as she talked about a painting, her fiery red hair, a beacon in the stuffy monochrome room. She was 24, an aspiring artist with more passion than talent, and she looked at him with an awe that he hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for decades. Jessica had been there that night too. She had drifted through the event with her usual understated elegance, ensuring the right people were greeted, smoothing over ruffled feathers, a ghost in the machine of their public life. He remembered looking from Sophie's vibrant, adoring face to Jessica's polite, distant smile, and feeling a pang of something he'd mistaken for liberation. The affair had been a whirlwind of extravagance. He'd showered Sophie with gifts, a condo with a view of the city, a new car trips to Paris and Bali. He had mistaken her gratitude for love and her dependence for devotion. With Sophie, he was not just a husband or a businessman. He was a god, a provider of miracles. She was his escape from the quiet, orderly, and passionless life he shared with Jessica. A life that he now realized with a sickening jolt was built on a foundation of what? He looked at his wife sitting there so calmly, and he couldn't find the answer. Their marriage hadn't always been like this. He remembered a younger Jessica, a woman with a quick wit and a fiery spirit of her own. They had been partners building his first company from their tiny apartment. She was the one who'd balanced the books, who'd talked him down from his rages, who'd believed in him when no one else did. But as the empire grew, she had retreated, or had he pushed her away? The more he conquered the outside world, the less he needed a partner, and the more he needed an administrator for his home life. She had faded into the background, becoming a part of the elegant, well-maintained scenery of his success. "You should go home, Jessica," he finally said the words, scraping his throat. "There's no need for you to be here." She turned her head slowly to look at him. Her eyes were not cold, but they held a clarity that was almost more unsettling. "I think I'll stay." "Why?" he demanded. "So you can watch me squirm. Is this some kind of morbid victory lap for you?" A flicker of something pity perhaps crossed her face before it was gone. "No, Robert. It's not a victory. It's just a consequence. I'm here because this is where I need to be." Her words made no sense to him. He was about to retort when a man in a long white coat approached them, his expression grave. He was older, with thinning grey hair and a deeply lined face that spoke of long nights and difficult conversations. His name badge read, Dr. Alan Peterson, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. Robert immediately straightened up, shifting into command mode. This was familiar territory. He was dealing with an expert, an employee, someone whose services he could purchase. Dr. Peterson, Robert said, extending a hand. I'm Robert Henderson. The patient Sophie Miller is with me. I want to know everything. I've told your staff I'll spare no expense. If you need equipment, specialists, whatever it is, my resources are at your disposal. Dr. Peterson looked at Robert's outstretched hand, but didn't take it. Instead, his gaze shifted to Jessica. A look of recognition, of profound and sincere respect, softened his tired features. Mrs. Henderson, he said, his voice imbued with a warmth that had been absent a moment before. It's an honor to finally meet you in person. I'm so sorry it's under these circumstances. Robert dropped his hand, a prickle of confusion and irritation running up his spine. Why was the doctor addressing Jessica? And with such deference, Jessica inclined her head slightly. Dr. Peterson, thank you for your work. How is the young woman? Robert felt a surge of fury. She's with me, he interjected, stepping between the doctor and his wife. I'm the one you should be talking to. I'm the one paying the bills. Dr. Peterson's eyes met Robert's over Jessica's shoulder. There was no intimidation in the doctor's gaze, only a calm, unwavering authority that Robert's wealth couldn't touch. Mr. Henderson, the doctor said, his tone clinical and precise. Miss Miller's condition is critical. She has a severe, undiagnosed congenital heart defect, aortic stenosis, complicated by a bicuspid valve. It's a miracle she's made it this long without a major incident. She's had what appears to be a minor coronary event, but the real danger is the underlying structural problem. She needs a highly complex valve replacement surgery, a Ross procedure to be precise. It's delicate, and it needs to happen within the next 12 hours. Robert's mind raced. A Ross procedure. Fine. Are you the best man for the job? I am, Dr. Peterson said simply. Good. Then what's the issue? Prep her for surgery. My checkbook is open. Dr. Peterson took a deep breath, his eyes flicking once more to Jessica, a silent, almost imperceptible communication passing between them. Robert saw it, and the knot of confusion in his gut tightened. The issue, Mr. Henderson, the doctor said, turning his full attention back to Robert, is that this isn't about your checkbook. We have everything we need. In fact, we have a protocol to follow. I was just confirming with Mrs. Henderson, as per the Benefactor's specific instructions. Benefactor instructions. Robert scoffed, a harsh, disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. I am the Benefactor. This is my guest. I'm taking financial responsibility. What instructions are you talking about? Jessica rose from her chair, her movements fluid and unhurried. She placed a gentle hand on Robert's arm. Her touch was cool and sent a strange shiver through him. Robert, please, she said softly. Let the doctor speak. He looked from his wife's eerily calm face to the doctor's inscrutable one. He felt like he had walked into a play where everyone but him had read the script. The foundations of his world, built on the simple transactional power of his wealth, were beginning to tremble. He was Robert Henderson. He gave the instructions. He didn't follow them. What do you mean, the Benefactor's instructions? Robert's voice was dangerously low. He felt the familiar heat of rage building in his chest, his go-to emotion when faced with confusion or a lack of control. "Let me be perfectly clear, Doctor. My name is on half the buildings in this city. When I say I'm covering the costs, it means I am the ultimate authority here. There is no other benefactor." Dr. Peterson held his ground, his professionalism a shield against Robert's aggression. "Mr. Henderson, I understand your concern, but this hospital specifically, this cardiac wing, the entire Peterson Center for Advanced Cardiology operates under a unique charter. It was funded by a single massive endowment several years ago." Robert's mind reeled. The Peterson Center. He'd heard of it. It was state-of-the-art, a jewel of medical science in the region that had seemingly appeared overnight. It poached the best talent and had access to technology other hospitals could only dream of. He'd even considered making a donation himself for the naming rights, but was told they weren't for sale at any price. An endowment, Robert repeated the word, tasting foreign. "Fine. Somebody else paid for the bricks and mortar. But the patient care the surgery for Sophie that's on my tab. I will pay you a fee that will fund your department for the next 5 years. Just get it done." He was throwing money at the problem the only way he knew how. Dr. Peterson shook his head slowly. "You don't seem to understand. The endowment covers more than just the building. It covers all operational costs, and it came with certain stipulations. The primary one being that a list of individuals updated annually by the Benefactor's Trust are to receive any and all necessary care preemptively and immediately at no cost. They are given absolute priority." The doctor paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the sterile air. Miss Sophie Miller's name was added to that list 6 months ago. The world tilted on its axis. Robert stared at the doctor, then at Jessica, his mind refusing to process the information. Sophie. On a secret VIP medical list. It was impossible. She was a nobody, an artist from a working-class family in Oregon. The only influential person she knew was him. That's ridiculous," Robert stammered. "Who put her on the list? Did she know about this?" "I can't speak to that," Dr. Peterson replied. "The Benefactor values anonymity above all else. We are simply instructed to act. Miss Miller's file was flagged the moment her name was entered into our system at admissions. That's why I was paged immediately. We've already begun prepping the OR. The best surgical team in the country is assembling as we speak. Everything is being taken care of, as per the protocol." Robert felt a wave of dizzying vertigo. The very actions he had been trying to command with his wealth, the best team, the immediate prep, the top-tier care, were already happening but completely outside of his influence. He had been shouting orders into a storm, unaware that the ship was already being steered by an invisible captain. His eyes narrowed, suspicion curdling in his gut. "Who is this benefactor?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Is it one of my business rivals? Is this some kind of game, a way to get leverage over me?" That made sense. A powerful enemy, tracking his movements, using his mistress as a pawn in a larger corporate chess match. Dr. Peterson's expression was unreadable. "As I said, the benefactor insists on absolute anonymity. My only point of contact is through a legal trust. I have never met them." He then turned his gaze back to Jessica, his tone softening once again. "Mrs. Henderson, the pre-op preparations will take about an hour. Then the procedure itself will be 6 to 8 hours. It's going to be a long night. We have a private waiting area ready for you if you'd like. The offer, extended so personally and exclusively to Jessica, was like a slap in the face. "Why do you keep talking to her, Robert?" Finally exploded his voice, echoing in the hallway. He jabbed a finger towards his wife. "She has nothing to do with this. I am the one connected to Sophie. I am the one responsible for her." He ripped his wallet out again, pulling the sleek black card from its slot and shoving it towards the doctor's face. The gesture was reflexive, the act of a king, brandishing his scepter, expecting the world to bow. "Do you see this? This card has no limit. There is no problem. This cannot solve. Forget your phantom benefactor and their stupid lists. I am paying. I am in charge. Now you will talk to me, and you will do as I say." Dr. Peterson didn't even glance at the card. He looked at Robert with an expression that was not quite pity, but something close to it. It was the look of a man who held a profound, incontrovertible truth that the other person was not yet equipped to handle. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jessica held up a single slender hand, silencing him. She stepped forward, placing herself directly in Robert's line of sight. Her calm blue eyes held his, and for the first time he saw past the serene facade. He saw steel. He saw a depth he had never bothered to explore, an intelligence he had long ago dismissed. "Robert," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. "Put the card away. It's insulting to the doctor, and it's useless here. Useless." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Jessica, you live in a world that this card built. Don't you dare lecture me about what is and isn't useless." It was then that Dr. Peterson decided to deliver the final devastating blow. He looked directly at Robert, his voice clear, precise, and utterly final, severing the last thread of the reality Robert thought he knew. "Mr. Henderson," the doctor said, his gaze unflinching, "your money is not needed here. It has no power in this wing. As I've been trying to tell you, all arrangements have been made according to protocol." He paused, taking a deliberate breath before continuing. "Mrs. Henderson is the real benefactor." The doctor's words did not land like a thunderclap. They fell into the sterile air of the hospital corridor with the silent, absolute weight of a guillotine blade. Mrs. Henderson is the real benefactor. Robert Henderson heard the words, but his brain refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. It was like listening to a foreign language he almost understood. He stared at Dr. Peterson, then his gaze swiveled to Jessica. He was searching for the punchline, the hint of a joke, a misunderstanding. But there was none. Jessica's expression remained placid, but her eyes held his, confirming the doctor's statement with a silent, unwavering certainty. Dr. Peterson, seeing the utter devastation on Robert's face, decided a tactical retreat was in order. "I'll leave you two to talk," he said softly to Jessica, giving her a respectful nod. "I need to go scrub in. A nurse will be out to take you to the private suite when you're ready." He turned and walked away, his footsteps receding down the polished hall, leaving Robert and Jessica alone in the chasm of the reveal. Robert's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The entire architecture of his life, his identity, was built on the foundation of his wealth and the power it gave him. He was the benefactor, the provider, the patriarch. Jessica was Jessica, the quiet manager of his homes, the graceful hostess, the decorative but functional chair of his charity galas. She was an extension of his success, a reflection of his status. What? What did he say? Robert whispered the words finally finding air. He said, "I'm the benefactor." Robert Jessica replied, her voice still impossibly calm. "I endowed the Peterson Center 5 years ago." "You," he let out a choked, incredulous laugh. "With what money?" "My money." "Did you move my assets around? Is this some insane power play you cooked up with my accountants?" The accusation was desperate, a man grasping at straws in a hurricane. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Jessica's face. Not anger, but a deep, abiding sadness. "No, Robert. Not with your money. With my money." "Your money," he scoffed. "You haven't worked a day since we were 25. The allowance I give you, your PIN money, for shopping and charities, wouldn't buy the reception desk in this place. It was never an allowance, Robert." "That was just what you called it," she corrected him gently. "And you're right, that money is insignificant." She took a breath, as if preparing to open a door he never knew existed. "When my grandfather Thomas Carlyle passed away, you were busy with a hostile takeover in Chicago. You came to the funeral for an hour, patted my shoulder and left. You never asked about his will. You never asked about my inheritance." Robert vaguely remembered. Thomas Carlyle, a quiet, unassuming man who had run a small, independent investment firm. Jessica had been his only grandchild. Robert had assumed he'd left her a modest portfolio enough to fund her garden club dues for a lifetime. He'd never given it a second thought. "He didn't run a small firm," Robert Jessica continued, as if reading his mind. "He was one of the earliest private investors in biotech and enterprise software. He bought into companies in the late 70s and 80s that you'd never heard of, companies that went on to change the world. He preferred anonymity to fame. He valued influence over power. When he died, he left the entirety of the Carlyle Trust to me. Not to us. To me." The numbers she quoted next were so staggering they didn't seem real. It wasn't a fortune. It was a principality. A quiet, invisible empire of assets that dwarfed his own flashy, debt-leveraged real estate holdings. He had spent 3 decades clawing his way up a mountain, trumpeting his success from the peak, while she had been the silent owner of the entire mountain range. But why, he stammered, his mind unable to grasp the scale of the deception. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "We were married. You stopped seeing me as a partner a long time ago, Robert," she said, her voice devoid of accusation, stating it as a simple fact. "I became a part of the household staff, someone to manage the caterers and RSVP to parties. You had your world, your deals, your women. You didn't need my input. You needed my compliance. And my grandfather's money, it came with his wisdom. He always told me, never show your strength to a man who only values his own." She had lived by that creed. While he was out conquering, she was quietly cultivating. She had her own board, her own financial advisors, a parallel life he had been completely oblivious to. The charity galas he thought he was funding were in reality events where she was the primary anonymous donor, vetting organizations directing her immense resources with surgical precision. The hospital. He breathed the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "You built this entire wing." Dr. Peterson was a brilliant but underfunded researcher at the State University, she explained. "I read his papers on bicuspid aortic valve repair. I knew his work could save thousands of lives. So I gave him a blank check. The only condition was my anonymity and the creation of the Benefactors list, a list of people who, for one reason or another, I felt a duty to protect. The final horrifying piece of the puzzle slid into place. Sophie. He whispered the name, tasting like poison now. You put Sophie on the list, Jessica nodded. Yes. How did you even know about her? A small, wry smile touched her lips. Robert, you are not a subtle man. You leave a trail of credit card statements, hotel bookings, and jewelry receipts. I've known about Sophie since the week you met her, just as I knew about the flight attendant before her and the marketing VP before that. He felt stripped bare, his secret life exposed not as a clandestine conquest, but as a predictable, well-documented pattern of behavior observed by a superior intelligence. So this is it, then. He snarled, a last vestige of his pride lashing out. This is your revenge. You find out my mistress has a bad heart. You put her on a secret list, and you wait for her to collapse so you can stand here and gloat. You orchestrated this whole nightmare just to humiliate me. He wanted her to scream, to cry, to finally show the messy human emotion he could understand and fight against. Instead, she looked at him with that same unnerving, pitying calm. Revenge is such a simple, brutish concept, Robert. This was never about revenge, she said. This was about consequence management. I knew about Sophie's condition. My investigators are very thorough. They discovered she had a congenital heart defect she wasn't even aware of. She came from a poor family, had no health insurance until you started paying for it, and had likely never had a proper physical. The doctors she saw for minor colds wouldn't have detected it. She paused, her gaze turning inward for a moment. I knew that your lifestyle, the late nights, the rich food, the stress of being your secret, would accelerate her condition. It was a matter of time. I had a choice. I could let nature take its course and let a young woman die as a casualty of your carelessness. Or I could intervene. She looked back at him, her eyes clear and sharp. So I put her on the list. I made sure that when this inevitable day came, she would be in this building with Dr. Peterson's team, ready for her. I didn't do it for you, or even for her, really. I did it because I will not have a death on my conscience. Her life is her own. Her choices are her own. But the consequences of her being with you, those I could manage. This isn't about humiliating you, Robert. This is about me cleaning up one of your messes in the most efficient way possible. He stared at her, his mind a wasteland. His rage, his power, his identity, it had all evaporated. He was not the king in this story. He wasn't even a pawn. He was simply the mess. A predictable problem that his quiet, unassuming wife had preemptively and devastatingly solved. The full weight of Jessica's revelation settled upon Robert, not like a burden, but like a shroud. The world he had navigated with such arrogant confidence had been a fiction, a meticulously maintained stage set, where he was allowed to play the lead, unaware that the true director, producer, and financier watched him from the wings. Your investigators, he repeated numbly, snagging on the detail. The word implied a level of professional detached surveillance that was far more chilling than mere snooping. Of course, Jessica said, as if explaining the necessity of a gardener. You are the father of my children, and for better or worse, my husband. Your actions create liabilities. I need to be aware of them. When you began seeing Sophie Miller, I had a standard background assessment done, for my own protection. It was then that her family's medical history came to light. a history of early-onset heart disease, a maternal uncle who died at 30. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. He sank into one of the vinyl waiting room chairs, the one Jessica had vacated. It was still warm. He ran his hands over his face, the gesture of a man trying to wipe away a nightmare. His entire affair with Sophie, which he had seen as a vibrant, passionate rebellion against his staid life, was recast as a clinical case study in one of Jessica's reports. He wasn't a rogue. He was a predictable liability. All these years he murmured, speaking more to himself than to her. The charity board meetings I made you attend, the checks I wrote out from our account for your causes, that was all a show. It was your show, Robert, she corrected him softly. You needed to be seen as a philanthropist. It was good for your brand. I simply ensured the money went to legitimate, effective organizations. Often I would match your $100,000 donation with a $10 million anonymous one from my trust. You got the photo up in the paper. The hospital got the new MRI machine it actually needed. We both got what we wanted. He looked up at her, a new, desperate question in his eyes. Our children, David and Emily. Do they know? Jessica's expression softened with a genuine maternal warmth. They know their grandmother came from a family with resources. They understand the Carlyle Trust is a significant part of their heritage. But they don't know the full scale of it, nor the specifics of how I use it. I wanted them to grow up with the drive to make their own way in the world, not to simply be the idle inheritors of a fortune. I wanted them to have the ambition you once had, Robert. The fire I first fell in love with. That single personal admission was more painful than anything else she had said. It was a glimpse of the woman he had married, the partner he had lost in his relentless pursuit of more. That fire she mentioned, he had it still, but it had long since curdled from a creative forge into a destructive inferno burning through relationships and scorching the earth around him. A nurse appeared at the end of the hall. Mrs. Henderson. We have the suite ready for you. Jessica nodded at the nurse. Thank you, Maria. I'll be there in a moment. She turned back to Robert. They are taking Sophie into surgery now. You can wait here or you can go home. But the private suite is for me. The boundary was drawn with quiet, unassailable grace. I'm not leaving, he said, his voice raw. The bravado was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of stubbornness. He needed to see this through. He needed to see Sophie, the girl whose life was now an asset, being managed by his wife's foundation. Jessica studied him for a long moment. As you wish, she said. And then she turned and followed the nurse down the hall, leaving him alone once more. He sat there for hours. The muted soap opera on the television gave way to a game show, then the evening news. The faces in the waiting room changed. A family cried in relief. A man received devastating news and crumpled in on himself. Robert was oblivious to it all. He was trapped in the wreckage of his own life, sifting through memories that were now all tainted, all recontextualized. He remembered arguments over budgets, times he had patronizingly explained their financial situation to Jessica, vetoing a renovation she wanted, or questioning a trip she'd planned. How she must have laughed internally, sitting on a fortune that could buy their entire neighborhood 10 times over. He remembered his smug satisfaction as he wrote checks for their children's Ivy League educations, lecturing them on the value of $1 earned through hard work, while Jessica silently managed trust funds for them that would ensure they'd never have to work at all if they so chose. His whole life had been a lie, and he was the only one who hadn't known it. His power was a mirage. He had built a skyscraper, but she owned the land beneath it and the air rights above it. Around midnight, a young resident came out to give him an update, clearly sent as a courtesy. Mr. Henderson, Dr. Peterson asked me to let you know the procedure is going well. They've successfully bypassed the heart and are beginning the valve reconstruction. Everything is proceeding as planned. Thank you, Robert managed to say. The resident, a young man who looked barely older than Sophie, hesitated. I just have to say, sir, your wife is an incredible woman. What she's done for this hospital, for this city. She's a saint. Robert just nodded, unable to speak. The hero worship in the young doctor's eyes was for Jessica. He was an afterthought, the problematic husband of the saint. The hours crawled by. Each minute was a new torment, a fresh angle from which to view his own foolishness. He finally understood the look in Dr. Peterson's eyes. It wasn't pity. It was the detached sympathy one feels for a man who confidently strides off a cliff, unaware the ground has disappeared. He wasn't just a husband who had been caught cheating. He was a fraud who had been exposed. His very identity as a titan of industry, a master of the universe, had been revealed as a sham. At 4:30 a.m., just as the first grey light of dawn began to seep through the windows, Dr. Peterson appeared again. He looked exhausted, but triumphant. Robert leaped to his feet. She's stable, the doctor said, pulling off his surgical cap. The surgery was a success. The new valve is functioning perfectly. She's in recovery now. She has a long road ahead of her, but the prognosis is excellent. She's a very lucky young woman. Robert felt a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled his knees. Can I see her? Dr. Peterson's gaze flickered down the hall towards the private wing. She's still unconscious. It will be several hours before she can have visitors. Mrs. Henderson is with her now. She asked to be the first one to see her when she was moved to the ICU. Of course she did, the benefactor checking on her investment. The thought was bitter, but Robert knew it was true. This was Jessica's operation in every sense of the word. Tell me. Dr. Robert asked, his voice weary and defeated. How long have you known? Dr. Peterson looked at him with a newfound frankness. I've been reporting to her trust to her lawyers for 5 years. I only knew her as the Benefactor. I met her in person for the first time about a year ago, when we were planning the next phase of expansion. She's one of the most intelligent, compassionate, and decisive people I have ever met. She understands these complex medical issues better than most of my board members. He paused, then added, She told me about the situation tonight. About you. She said to be prepared. She manages every variable, Mr. Henderson. Every single one. And there it was. Robert wasn't a player in a game of chess. He was the variable. A predictable, messy human variable that Jessica Henderson, the secret empress, had finally decided to manage. The intensive care unit was a world of quiet, rhythmic beeping. Each pulse on the screen, each soft puff of the ventilator was a testament to the miracle that had been performed. Sophie lay in the bed, looking small and impossibly fragile amidst a web of tubes and wires. Her fiery hair was spread out on the white pillow, a stark splash of color in the sterile room. Jessica sat in a chair by the bedside, not reading, not looking at her phone, simply watching. When Robert appeared in the doorway, she didn't seem surprised. She just looked at him, then back at the sleeping girl. He walked into the room, his footsteps feeling heavy and intrusive. He stood on the opposite side of the bed, looking down at Sophie. Her face was pale, but peaceful. The frantic terror of last night was gone, replaced by a medically induced calm. He felt a surge of affection and guilt. He had done this to her. His carelessness, his ego had brought her to this brink, and Jessica's foresight had pulled her back. The doctor said she's going to be okay, Robert said, his voice husky. Yes, Jessica replied. She'll need months of recovery and cardiac rehab. But she'll live a full, normal life. She's been given a second chance. The subtext was deafening, a second chance that I provided. They stood in silence for several long minutes, the only sound the steady rhythm of the machines that were keeping Sophie alive. I don't understand why you did it, Jessica, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Not the money, not the hospital, but this, her. Why save her? Why not just let me fail? Let me face the consequences of my own actions for once. Wouldn't that have been a more fitting punishment? Jessica turned her head to look at him, her gaze clear and analytical. Because her death would have served no purpose. It would have destroyed you. Yes. A part of you at least. But it would have been an ugly, brutish thing. It would have ended a young life full of potential. My goal was never to punish you, Robert. My goal was to protect the legacy and the family that I have spent my life building and maintaining, despite your best efforts to complicate it. Protect the family. By saving my mistress, he asked, the irony thick in his voice. Precisely, she said. Imagine the alternative. She has her cardiac event at the condo you rent for her. An ambulance is called. A frantic, uninsured young woman is brought to a city hospital. Her condition is misdiagnosed or mishandled by a less experienced team. She dies. Then what? The scandal would be immense. Billionaire Robert Henderson's secret young lover dies. It would be a media firestorm. It would drag our children's names through the mud. It would impact the stock price of your company. It would tarnish everything. Your affair was a private indiscretion. Her death would have been a very public catastrophe. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping with intensity. This way there is no catastrophe. There is only a quiet medical procedure. A young artist with a previously unknown heart condition has life-saving surgery at the country's top cardiac center. A mystery benefactor foots the bill. She recovers, and she disappears from your life. The liability is neutralized. The family is protected. It is the most logical, efficient solution. He stared at her, horrified and awestruck. She hadn't been playing checkers, or even yet chess. She had been playing a different game entirely, one whose rules he was only now beginning to comprehend. It wasn't a game of passion and revenge. It was a game of risk management and asset protection. And his affairs, his very emotions, were just entries on her balance sheet. A few hours later, Sophie began to stir. A nurse came in and expertly began to lower the sedation levels. Jessica stood up. I think it's best if I'm the one here when she wakes up, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. What are you going to say to her? Robert demanded a protective instinct he didn't realize he still had, flaring up. The truth, Jessica replied simply. Or at least as much of it as she needs to know. She needs to understand the new reality of her situation. He wanted to argue, to insist on his right to be there, but he had no rights here. He was an observer in a drama that was being directed by his wife. He retreated to the hallway, watching through the glass pane of the door. He saw Sophie's eyelids flutter open. He saw her confusion, the fear in her eyes as she took in the tubes and the sterile room. And he saw Jessica lean in her expression, calm and reassuring, speaking to her softly. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the effect they had on Sophie. The fear in the younger woman's eyes slowly gave way to disbelief, then to a dawning, shocking understanding. Her gaze flickered towards the door towards him, and he saw a look he had never seen from her before. Not adoration, not passion, but a kind of horrified clarity. She was seeing him for the first time through Jessica's eyes. After about 20 minutes, Jessica emerged from the room. "She's lucid," Jessica said. "She understands. She asked me to give you this." She handed him a small, simple gold locket he had given Sophie on their 3-month anniversary. It was still warm from her skin. "She doesn't want to see you, Robert. Not now. Not ever again," Jessica said, her voice flat, merely relaying information. "The trust will be handling her post-operative care. A private nurse, a quiet rehabilitation facility upstate. She'll also be given a scholarship to complete her master's degree in fine arts, something she always wanted to do. She will have her second chance free and clear of you." He clutched the locket in his hand, the metal biting into his palm. He had lost. He had lost in a way so complete, so total that he was only just beginning to map its boundaries. He hadn't just lost his mistress. He had lost the illusion of his own power. He looked at Jessica, truly looked at her, and saw the stranger he had been married to for 28 years. The quiet, efficient woman who ran his house was an empress ruling a hidden kingdom. The wife he had cheated on and dismissed was a strategist who saw the world with a clarity he could never hope to achieve. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her patience for weakness. He had been a fool. What now, he asked the question hanging in the sterile air. "What happens to us?" Jessica looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Go home, Robert. Get some sleep. We will talk in a few days when this chapter is fully closed." She turned and walked away, her posture perfect, her footsteps silent. She did not look back. Robert was left standing alone in the hospital corridor, clutching a cheap piece of gold, the last relic of a life that was no longer his. A week later, Jessica summoned Robert to the formal dining room. They sat at opposite ends of the long mahogany table, the polished wood between them a vast, empty expanse. For 7 days, Robert had been a ghost in his own life, his work feeling like a pointless game. His power, he now understood, had always been an illusion. Without a word, Jessica slid a leather folder across the table. It stopped perfectly before him. "Divorce papers," he stated, his voice flat. "The terms are generous," she said, her tone level and cool. "Everything the world knows as yours, the company. This house, your accounts, remains yours. I am taking only what has always been mine." He opened the folder, scanning the pages. She was right. It was a clean, surgical excision. He was bewildered. "Why?" he asked, looking up at her. "After everything, why not ruin me?" "You could. You have the power to dismantle my entire world. Because a war would be messy," Jessica replied, her gaze unwavering. "And I have spent the better part of our marriage quietly cleaning up your messes, Robert. I refuse to let our divorce become your final, most spectacular one. This isn't punishment. It's an exit." A desperate, last-ditch plea rose in his throat. "Jess, I see it now. I was a fool." "We could—" "No," she interrupted, her voice gentle but absolute. "It's too late. What you're feeling isn't a desire to have me back. It's the shock of a king discovering his crown is made of paper. You aren't mourning me. You are mourning the loss of your own perceived power." Her words struck him with the force of an undeniable truth. He was a fraud, and she was the only one who had always known. He looked down at the pen beside the document. For his entire life, his signature had been an act of creation and conquest. It built buildings and crushed competitors. Now it was an instrument of surrender. With a shaking hand, Robert Henderson signed his name, acknowledging the end of his marriage and the end of the illusion he had lived in for so long. He pushed the folder back across the table. Jessica stood, taking the documents. She offered no final parting shot. No look of triumph, only a quiet finality. "Goodbye, Robert," she said. Then she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing faintly in the grand, empty house. He was left alone at the head of the table, a dethroned king in a hollow castle, the silence his only companion. What a story of power perception and the quiet moves that can completely change the game. Robert Henderson believed his power came from the noise he made, the buildings he owned, and the money he could throw around. He never realized that true power often operates in silence. Jessica Henderson played a long game, one not of revenge, but of consequence management. Was her act of saving her husband's mistress the ultimate power move, a cold and calculated strategy to protect her own world? Or was it an act of profound, if detached, mercy for a young woman caught in the crossfire? It's a question that really makes you think about the nature of justice and control. What do you think? Was Jessica a hero, a villain, or something far more complex? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story captivated you and made you think, please do us a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with a friend who appreciates a story with a stunning twist. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life dramas that peel back the layers of the human experience. Your support is everything to us. Thanks for listening.